Hi everyone! Today I want to talk to you guys about 5 ways that stress is making you sick. So first off, I want to talk about what is stress. Stress comes in many different forms, but ultimately we need to make a differentiation between the stressor and the stress itself. The stressor are the items, the triggers, the things that happen around you that causes stress internally. Stress itself is an internal process, which typically you guys have often heard about cortisol rising and stuff like that. Well, cortisol is the hormone that gets triggered when you are experiencing a stressor. So very important to understand the difference between the two things. Now, once you have a stressor that triggers the stress cycle or the stress response in your body, there's a couple of things that happen, or there's a couple of impacts to your health. And there's really a ton of them, but I just really want to focus on the 5 key ones. The first one is an emotional imbalance. So emotional imbalance in the sense of you actually feel and experience stress. It might cause anxiety, it might cause anger, it might cause sadness, it might cause a slew of what you would categorize as negative emotions. So an emotional imbalance can be the result of a stressor. It could increase inflammation, which is secondary impact. Inflammation tends to be more when it's a long chronic stress. So if you have elevated cortisol levels for a prolonged period of time, that will cause chronic inflammation, which in turn causes all kinds of other issues, which will lead me to the other 3 points or the other 3 impacts. One being a reduced immune system. Another is a draining of energy, so you feel like you don't have a lot of energy. Sometimes that is an impact of having a low cortisol, so the kind of downward spiral of having too high cortisol for too long. And the last but not least is weight gain. So again, these 5 impacts that all kind of impact one another. Emotional imbalance on a negative way, increased inflammation, which can eventually lead to reduced immune system, drains your energy, and or weight gain in the long run. So I have an entire video all about the single one thing that you should not do so that you don't exacerbate your stress. And that is, I'm going to leave a link somewhere here, but that is all about worrying and how that's really going to make your stress even worse. But I have an entire video covering that, so I won't dive into it today here. What I will focus on, though, are the 3 tactics that you can use to actually reduce your stress. So the first one is journaling. The second is moving your body. And the third is learning to breathe. So starting with the first one, when you journal and you write something down, and it could also be talking to a friend, the important thing is to turn the internal thoughts to an external output. So whether that is talking to somebody or just writing it down. Because what happens there is that you're activating your prefrontal cortex, and this is the logical or the rational part of your brain that makes sense of things. You want to be able to get those stressors or those stressful thoughts out on paper or out towards somebody where you're activating that prefrontal cortex so you can make sense of it. And the reason for that is if you're just talking to yourself in your mind about it, you end up very likely going into automatic negative thoughts and going into an obsessive pattern where you cannot get out of it because you're not focusing on the action items that you can do or the how you can get out of that situation. You're focusing on the actual feeling of stress itself. The second one is all about closing the stress cycle. So we evolved to react to a stressor. So it could be like a tiger chasing after you or you needing to run after something, whatever that looks like. Imagine cave woman. And so your cortisol levels spike, your adrenaline levels spike, but typically it's a very acute spike. And after you run or you move your body, that threat, i.e. tiger, should be gone. Like you should be able to run away from it in our evolutionary lingo, if you will. And so what happens is when you stop running, your body goes, oh, I'm no longer in need of the adrenaline. Let me lower down the cortisol. Let me lower down the adrenaline. Let me bring you back to a normalized and balanced state. Now, we obviously are no longer running away from tigers or lions or whatever it is that's trying to eat us, but that stress cycle response remains the same. So an easy way to eliminate stress is to move your body. That could be dance like no one is watching. It could be do a quick exercise. It could literally mean just shaking your body so that you really release the energy. And the last one is learning to breathe. So very often when we experience a trigger or a stressor, our limbic brain, our reptilian brain gets turned on. And so you often hear about the fight or flight or freeze mode. So that emotional response kicks in. And unless you interrupt it with something like breathing or moving your body, you're allowing your brain to turn off the prefrontal cortex, that rational side of your brain, and going straight into intuition. So a very reptilian response. When you learn to breathe and you take a second to pause, it allows your entire system to go back to the parasympathetic system, which means it calms your body down so that you can start to reactivate that prefrontal cortex that we talked about and start to engage in a more rational thought. And all of this is really about addressing your stress separately from your stressor. So your stressor is still likely going to be there once you're no longer stressed or you don't feel the anxiety anymore and your heart rate is lowered. But the stressor is still there. So the idea is that you want to reduce your stress, you want to be able to reactivate that prefrontal cortex so you can think clearly and then address the stressor appropriately. If you guys found this video helpful, please check back here. I post a new video every single Friday.